I grew up in Wisconsin. That's sort of a small town, and I wasn't particularly involved in anything, but I was the person in my family that was the smart kid. I was the one who got it in school. The classroom was where I felt really comfortable. That was my domain. Just really kind of focused on people and how they work, and I find that fascinating. When I went to college, I went to college in Boston at Boston University. So then I went to a rape crisis center in Boston, and I wanted to volunteer to be on their hotline. So again, at that time it was no big deal. This was in, I guess it would probably be 1983 or maybe 82 or 83. And at that time, rape crisis centers weren't as kind of, I guess I want to say professional or organized as they are now. So at the time, this was just like a bunch of women who carried a beeper. And in those early days, it was just when rape crisis centers were starting to get funded by the state to provide that service. So I started to do that work, and I think it was just the stage of life I was in. I just got really involved in this question about sexual aggression and how it happened and why it happened and what could be done about it. To be a clinician, and at some point I just realized that the thing that I was really interested in, the question I was really interested in, had to do with sexual assault, but that I wasn't really thinking that what I wanted to do was to be counseling women who had experienced sexual assault in my life. I just thought, I know it's very important work, I'm glad people do it, but it just wasn't me. It wasn't the thing I wanted to do, but I just kept getting more and more curious about it. Doing this research internship let me see, oh, okay, well I can follow with what everybody else is doing, and this makes sense to me, and I can analyze the question the same way that anybody else can. And so at the same time that I was thinking, I'm not sure that I want to do the counseling end of it, I started to get interested in doing the research side of psychology. I stayed in Boston for 4 years, and I worked for a couple of years at a bank, and then I worked for a couple of years at Harvard Law School as a secretary. I started to try to figure out, well, who's doing work about sexual aggression? And at this time, because of these 2 internships that I had done working with women, I just was very interested and focused on working somehow with women. And this is at a time in psychology when there was a lot of focus on women. And the question in psychology at the time was, were women really different from men, or were they really not different in important ways? Because people tend to think of women as being really essentially very different, and having whole different motives and having whole different capabilities. And the psychological researcher wasn't supporting that. So it was kind of a time in psychology when there was focus on gender, and I just became really interested in gender broadly. And my advisor the person I ended up studying with at UCLA, Neil Malamuth, his perspective was that this is broader than simply the men who were incarcerated, that we were looking too narrowly if we thought that sexual aggression was only being perpetrated by the men that we were catching, that there was a lot more out there. And the second wave feminist movement was finding the same thing, that there were many, many, many more people who had experienced sexual violence than the people who actually reported it to the police. Mount St. Mary's was the first place where I got to work with all women students. This was just a great thing. I loved working in a women's college. I loved teaching in a women's college. I saw the classroom as a place where women's lives were changed. So I felt like what we were doing was shifting people's lives in a way that I think only higher education can do, right? That it requires a big intervention to go from a family where folks are working class, which is what I was when I went to college, to go from being a working class family to being a family where you are somebody who is able to have a profession or be in a professional role. And we were part of making that transformation possible for those students, and I loved it, loved every minute of it. I loved being in a classroom, and that there was some kind of a magic that was happening for women in those classrooms. So for me, one of the most important things I did at Mount St. Mary's was to help students to prepare for graduate school, help to write a personal statement, help them to figure out how to apply, what their strategy should be. And, so there are women who moved on into graduate careers, in part because of my help. And I love doing that. That was such a great thing. I think one of the most important things I've done in my career is to help students to move on in their careers, to move into their professions. So that, I think, has been a big thing. But those influences are sort of small at the individual level. And so I think a second important thing has been in the administrative work I've done since I've been doing this kind of work, has been to try to create the opportunity for faculty and students to have those kinds of conversations, right? To try to increase the likelihood of students getting the kind of support and guidance that they need to get onto that next stage. It's something we're doing at Mercy right now, is trying to really encourage our students to be thinking about careers much, much earlier than when I did at the, at the end of my senior year of college, right? So trying to support those efforts by making sure the students are prepared, I think, is the most important thing that we can be doing. And so now my job is to try to make sure that I create that opportunity for faculty and for students.